At 4:22 a.m., a quiet parking lot in West Milton, Ohio, became the stage for something unthinkable. A man pulled in, stepped out of his car, opened the trunk, and moments later, ended his own life. When officers arrived, they thought they were responding to a routine welfare check, but what they found inside that trunk would leave even seasoned investigators speechless. Inside was the lifeless body of his wife. Hours earlier, another woman, a young U.S. Air Force lieutenant, had also been found dead miles away. Who were these people? What drove a man with no known criminal record to commit such brutality, and then arrange the discovery of his own horror? Why did he leave the trunk open as if he wanted someone to find what he'd done? By the time dawn broke, 2 women were dead, and 1 man had orchestrated their final scene. This is their story, the tragedy of Jacob and Jaymee Prichard and First Lieutenant Jaime Gustitus, a chain of violence that shook the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and left an entire community searching for answers. Before the gunfire, before the flashing lights in the early hours of October 25th, there were 3 people, ordinary on the outside, respected in their careers, and deeply woven into the world of the U.S. Air Force. Let's begin with Jacob Prichard, 34 years old. To his colleagues at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Jacob was known as a quiet, focused employee. He worked in the Air Force Research Laboratory, the same facility that studies cutting-edge aerospace and defense technologies, a place filled with some of the nation's brightest minds. People who crossed paths with him described him as reserved but competent, someone who did his job and rarely drew attention. He lived in Huber Heights, just outside Dayton, a suburban area filled with young professionals connected to the base. Neighbors said the Pritchards kept to themselves. No loud arguments. No police visits. Just another married couple living what seemed like a stable life. But behind that calm exterior, something was unraveling, something no one around him could see coming. Then there was Jaymee Prichard, Jacob's wife. She was 33, smart, professional, and by all accounts devoted to her work. Jaymee also worked at Wright-Patterson, though in a different division, the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center, where she contributed to logistics and systems that support U.S. military operations. Friends described her as kind, loyal, and steady, someone who carried herself with quiet confidence. Outside of work, she was known to be warm-hearted, often smiling in photos, and supportive of her husband's demanding career. To those who knew them, Jacob and Jaymee seemed like a team, not the kind of couple you'd ever imagine making headlines for something like this. And then there was First Lieutenant Jaime Gustitus. At just 25 years old, she was already making waves in her field. Jaymee worked as an officer in the Air Force Research Laboratory's Human Performance Wing, a branch focused on optimizing human capability in extreme conditions. She was bright, ambitious, and admired by those around her. Her colleagues described her as driven and compassionate, someone who wanted to make a difference not only in science but in service. She lived in Sugar Creek Township, about 40 minutes from the Pritchards, in a quiet apartment complex where she was known as friendly and professional, never the kind of person to draw the wrong kind of attention. The connection between these 3, Jacob, Jaymee, and Jaymee, wasn't one of friendship or family but proximity. They shared the same base, the same culture, and the same high-pressure environment. Jacob and Jaymee worked within the same research laboratory, colleagues not necessarily close but familiar. Jaymee, though in another department, likely knew of Jaymee through her husband's circle. Their worlds overlapped just enough to create a bridge, one that would, somehow, lead to tragedy. It's easy to forget that headlines like these once belonged to real people. People who had careers, ambitions, and morning routines. A wife who once left for work with a quick goodbye kiss. A young lieutenant whose future seemed limitless. And a man who, for reasons still unclear, would shatter all of it before the sun came up. It began in the quiet hours before dawn, when most of Ohio was still asleep. October 25, 2024, 2 a.m. In a quiet apartment complex in Sugar Creek Township, 25-year-old First Lieutenant Jaime Gustitus was inside her home when something shattered the calm. Police would later say that Jacob Prichard, 34, had broken into her apartment. A glass sliding door had been smashed, shards scattered across the floor. Neighbors told reporters they woke up to the sound of banging, then a sharp crack, a noise that didn't sound like a door slamming. One neighbor said it was a sound that didn't fit the night. Within minutes it was over. By the time officers arrived, they found Jaime Gustitus dead, the result of a gunshot wound. The entry showed signs of a struggle, but whatever happened inside that apartment happened fast. No one saw Jacob enter or leave. No one could explain why he went there at all. Investigators later confirmed that Gustitus and Prichard had worked in the same division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but there was no clear record of a personal relationship. What drove him to her door that night remains one of the biggest unanswered questions. From that moment on, the night became a blur of motion, a trail of tragedy that stretched across counties. Between 2 a.m. and 4:22 a.m., Jacob Prichard vanished from sight. What happened in those 2 hours is still unclear. Police believe that sometime in that window his wife, Jaime Prichard, was killed, though where and when remain uncertain. Her body would later be found in the trunk of their car. Authorities haven't publicly said whether she was killed at home, on the road, or elsewhere. What is known is that both women, Jaime Gustitus and Jaime Prichard, lost their lives within a span of just a few hours. At 4:22 a.m., Jacob pulled into the parking lot of the West Milton Municipal Building, about 40 miles from where the night began. Surveillance footage and police reports describe a dark vehicle gliding into the lot under dim streetlights. He parked, opened his trunk, and what he did next shocked investigators. Authorities believe he deliberately left the trunk open, exposing Jamie's body, almost as if ensuring someone would find her. Moments later, Jacob Prichard took his own life. A handgun was found beside him when officers arrived. By 5 a.m., a local officer on patrol noticed the car, trunk open, no movement inside. At first, it might have seemed like a case of car trouble or someone sleeping behind the wheel. But when the officer approached and saw what was inside the trunk, the scene transformed into something far more horrifying. Within minutes, the parking lot was sealed off. Crime scene tape stretched across the municipal building entrance. Flashing red and blue lights washed over the asphalt as investigators from West Milton Police, Sugar Creek Township, and Montgomery County began piecing together what had happened. Word spread quickly back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where stunned coworkers woke up to the news that 3 of their own, all serving in the Air Force's research divisions, were gone. Reporters later described the discovery as a murder-suicide that spanned 2 cities. And yet, even as police traced the timeline, there were gaps, questions about motive, relationships, and what triggered the sudden violence. By sunrise, the story had already reached national headlines. But for those who knew the victims, it didn't feel like a story. It felt like a nightmare, one that began quietly, inside an apartment on a still Ohio night. And as investigators would soon learn, that was only the beginning. What came next would deepen the mystery even further, revealing new layers of connection and unsettling truths hidden behind the lives of 3 people who once shared the same workplace, the same community, and a fate that no one could have foreseen. 2 towns, 3 deaths, and a trail of evidence stretching more than 40 miles across western Ohio. When investigators began piecing the night together, they realized this was not a single crime scene, but 3 separate locations, each holding fragments of the same dark story. The first scene lay in Sugar Creek Township, at a quiet apartment complex just off Wilmington-Dayton Road. It was here that officers found First Lieutenant Jaime Gustitus, 25, dead inside her home. The scene was violent. A shattered sliding glass door, splintered wood, and signs of forced entry. Police confirmed that Jacob Prichard had broken in during the early morning hours. Neighbors told local stations they'd been startled awake around 2 a.m., hearing glass breaking followed by what sounded like a single gunshot. One neighbor said it was the kind of sound that makes your heart stop, then silence. Inside, investigators discovered what they described as clear evidence of homicide. A handgun shell casing was found near the body. The weapon believed to have been used was later recovered, the same one found near Prichard's body in West Milton. There were no signs of a robbery. Nothing stolen. No valuables disturbed. It appeared that Prichard had come there for Jaime, and only her. Forensic teams worked carefully through the night, photographing every inch of the apartment. Blood spatter analysis, ballistic trajectories, and prints, each detail potentially holding answers to a question no one yet understood. Why her? At that point, investigators believed Gustitus was the first to die. From Sugar Creek, the case moved west, tracing the route Jacob Prichard drove after the killing. It's a stretch of about 40 miles, cutting through quiet back roads and small towns before reaching West Milton. Along that route, detectives tried to reconstruct his movements. Surveillance cameras at gas stations and intersections were reviewed. At least one camera in West Milton captured his car pulling into the municipal building parking lot at 4:22 a.m. In the footage, the car stops, the brake lights fade, and then the trunk opens. Authorities later said it appeared deliberate. Inside the trunk was the body of Jaime Prichard, Jacob's wife. The positioning of her body and the fact that the trunk had been left open gave investigators the impression that Jacob intended for police to find her. He then turned the gun on himself. When officers discovered the scene around 5 a.m., they found two bodies, Jacob in the driver's seat area and Jaime in the trunk, along with a handgun beside him. Crime scene technicians began collecting evidence immediately. Shell casings, fingerprints, ballistic samples, all cataloged for analysis. The forensic timeline, however, was murky. Medical examiners could not yet determine when Jaime had been killed, only that it had happened sometime between Jaime's death in Sugar Creek and Jacob's suicide in West Milton. That missing window, roughly 2 hours long, became the most critical gap in the investigation. Police later confirmed that both women had died from gunshot wounds, likely from the same weapon. The ballistic matches, combined with cell phone data and vehicle tracking, pointed clearly to Jacob Prichard as the sole suspect. But what still wasn't clear days later, was why. Why he drove to Jaime's home. Why he brought his wife's body to West Milton. And what happened in those unseen hours between the first and second killings. The two primary scenes, Gustitus' apartment and the municipal parking lot, were processed by separate teams. At the apartment, technicians collected physical evidence. Glass fragments, doorframe with splinters and blood patterns. At the parking lot, they recovered digital data from Jacob's car. GPS logs, text messages, and call histories. Investigators also examined his work-issued devices from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, hoping to find any indication of conflict, communication, or motive. Back at the base, officials released statements expressing shock and sorrow, emphasizing that all three victims were part of the same Air Force community. Flags were lowered to half-staff. Counseling services were offered. And yet, within the base's walls, whispers began, about workplace tensions, rumors of personal connections, and the heavy stress many employees carried. Still, no official evidence linked those theories to what happened that night. For journalists covering the case, the contrast was chilling. A promising Air Force officer dead in her home. A devoted wife found in her husband's trunk. And a man whose final act was to arrange their discovery, then end his own life. Detectives built a map of the night, a haunting visual reconstruction of the path Jacob took from Sugar Creek to West Milton. Pinpoints on that map marked the apartment, the route across the counties, and the final destination near the municipal lot. Forensic reports and timeline analysis narrowed his journey to about 2.5 hours, a small stretch of time that carried irreversible consequences. But even as the physical evidence came together, the shell casings, the fingerprints, the surveillance, one thing remained out of reach: the motive. What could drive a man with a stable career, a home, and no known criminal history to commit 2 murders and end his own life? Why Jaime Gustitus, his colleague? Why Jaime, his wife? By the time investigators cleared the scenes, they had more questions than answers. And as detectives prepared their next move, interviews, background checks, digital forensics, one unsettling truth began to emerge. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was something far more personal. At this point in the investigation, the evidence told police how the murders happened. But it still didn't explain why. Every road led back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, one of the largest and most secretive Air Force installations in the country. It's where all three, Jacob Prichard, his wife Jaime, and First Lieutenant Jaime Gustitus, worked. And it's where, investigators believe, the threads of this tragedy first began to intertwine. Jacob was part of the Air Force Research Laboratory, a prestigious unit known for cutting-edge projects on technology and defense innovation. Colleagues described him as competent, focused, and disciplined, a man who kept his private life private. He wasn't known to cause trouble. No criminal history. No prior disciplinary issues. Nothing that suggested the violence that would come. Jaime, his wife, also served at the base, working in the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center, the division responsible for overseeing aircraft systems, maintenance, and logistics. Coworkers remembered her as warm, intelligent, and dedicated, someone who balanced a professional career with a close family life. Friends said she and Jacob had been married for years, their lives seemingly built on shared values and service to the same mission. No public record hinted at domestic conflict. No restraining orders. No prior reports of violence. And then there was First Lieutenant Jaime Gustitus, just 25 years old. A rising officer in the Human Performance Wing at the research laboratory, stationed in Sugar Creek Township. By all accounts, she was brilliant. A high-achieving Air Force lieutenant passionate about research that improved pilot safety and mental resilience. Her commanding officers described her as driven and respected, with a career that seemed destined for leadership. In photos shared publicly by the base, she appeared bright-eyed, confident, the image of promise. All three, Jacob, Jaime, and Jaymee, were part of the same base community. Their professional circles likely overlapped, especially within research and administrative departments. Officials later confirmed that Jacob and Jaymee worked in related divisions within the Air Force Research Laboratory, though it remains unclear how often they interacted. Jaymee, in a separate but connected wing, likely knew her husband's colleagues through workplace events or social gatherings common among Air Force staff. When news broke that all three had died, rumors began to spread through the halls of Wright-Patterson. Was this a case of romantic jealousy? A personal betrayal that spiraled out of control? Or something deeper, a psychological collapse masked beneath military discipline? Investigators combed through digital records, work emails, and social media, looking for any sign of a relationship between Jacob and Jaymee. But as of the last official statements, no confirmed romantic link had been established. The base's leadership released a public message emphasizing that speculation was premature, and that all three were valued members of the Air Force community. Still, off the record, some who worked near them spoke quietly of possible tension, of a coworker friendship that may have become emotionally complicated. Nothing confirmed, but enough to fuel endless theories. Psychologists reviewing the case from afar pointed to possible emotional instability or acute stress. Military work environments, especially in research and technology sectors, are high pressure, with long hours, confidentiality demands, and the weight of national responsibility. If Jacob had been struggling personally or mentally, those close to him may not have seen the signs. There were no documented mental health concerns made public, and no one has yet stepped forward to say he sought help. But the nature of his actions, killing two women, then taking his own life, suggested a deep psychological unraveling. Forensic analysts described the killings as targeted and deliberate. Both women appeared to be killed with the same weapon, both shot at close range. There was no evidence of theft, random rage, or external interference. Everything pointed to a personal motive. And yet, the motive remained entirely unconfirmed. Was it jealousy? Revenge? Possession? Did Jacob discover something, a betrayal, real or imagined, that triggered a fatal obsession? The timeline gap between 2 a.m. and 4:22 a.m. remained a haunting blank. Authorities still don't know when or where Jaymee was killed. Was she killed before Jacob went to Jaymee's apartment? Or did he return home afterward, carrying the weight of one murder into another? The autopsy results and digital data may one day answer that, but for now it remains one of the most chilling uncertainties in the case. What the public knows is this. By the time Jacob drove into the municipal lot in West Milton, he had made a decision: to die. And to ensure that both women, his wife and his colleague, were found. The trunk left open, the scene staged with precision, as if to deliver a message even in death. But what was that message? Was it guilt? Control? Remorse? Or an attempt to make sure the story ended on his terms? Military investigators and local law enforcement have kept much of the personal background sealed, citing ongoing inquiries and respect for the families. But the tragedy has sparked conversation far beyond Ohio, about mental health in the military, about relationship boundaries in professional environments, and about how quiet unraveling can turn deadly before anyone sees the signs. To this day, no confirmed motive has been publicly released. Only speculation, and questions that echo long after the case file closed. Now, what do you think connected Jaymee and Jaymee in Jacob's mind? Was it love, betrayal, jealousy, or something darker still? Tell us what you think in the comments, because sometimes, understanding why is the hardest mystery of all. By sunrise, 2 towns were crime scenes, and a third, the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, was plunged into disbelief. 3 lives lost. 1 man dead by his own hand. And a trail of evidence stretching across counties, commands, and chains of military authority. From the moment the first 911 calls came in, multiple agencies became involved. The Sugar Creek Township Police Department took the lead at the first scene, the apartment where First Lieutenant Jaime Gustitus was found. Meanwhile, the West Milton Police Department and the Miami County Sheriff's Office handled the second, the municipal lot where Jacob and his wife, Jaymee, were discovered. But with all 3 victims tied to the U.S. Air Force, jurisdiction quickly expanded. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, or BCI, was called in to lead the overarching probe, working hand in hand with military investigators. They were joined by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, OSI, the agency responsible for handling serious crimes and security matters involving Air Force personnel. Together, they formed a multi-agency task force, local, state, and federal, sharing information, evidence, and surveillance data. It was a complex, delicate investigation. Because the victims weren't just citizens, they were members of the U.S. military. Their workplace, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, is one of the largest and most secure installations in the nation, home to over 30,000 personnel, research units, and classified programs. Every statement, every release had to be carefully worded, cleared, and respectful of ongoing operations. Within hours, the base's public affairs office issued a somber statement. "We are deeply saddened by the tragic deaths of 3 members of our Wright-Patterson Air Force Base community. Our thoughts are with the families, friends, and co-workers of those lost." Base officials confirmed that all 3 victims had been part of different but connected wings of the Air Force. Jacob and Jaymee within the Air Force Research Laboratory, and Jaime within the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center. The following day, Lieutenant General Linda Hurry, commander of the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center, released her own message. Her tone was personal, grief-stricken, and resolute. "Our Air Force family is devastated by this tragedy. We mourn alongside the families of those lost, and we are fully supporting the ongoing investigation to ensure every question is answered." Across the base, flags were lowered to half-staff. Counseling and chaplain services were made available to personnel. And behind the scenes, teams of OSI agents began reconstructing the victims' final days. They pulled phone logs, email records, and badge entry data from Wright-Patterson's secure facilities. They reviewed surveillance footage both on and off base, tracing Jacob's movements in the days leading up to the shootings. They contacted neighbors, co-workers, and family members, trying to build a timeline of relationships and communication. But even as the investigation deepened, the biggest mystery remained unsolved. When and where was Jaymee Prichard killed? Her body had been found in the trunk of Jacob's car, but forensic analysis couldn't pinpoint the exact location or time of death. There were no witnesses, no surveillance of her last movements. Only a grim certainty: by the time Jacob reached the parking lot at 4:22 a.m., she was already gone. That 2-hour gap between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. haunted investigators. Some believed Jaymee was killed before Jacob drove to Jaime's apartment. Others theorized it happened afterward, that he returned home, consumed by guilt or rage, and turned the weapon on his wife before ending it all. But without digital confirmation or eyewitnesses, the sequence of events remained shrouded in uncertainty. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation confirmed that ballistics testing was underway to match shell casings from both crime scenes. Early findings indicated that the same weapon, a handgun recovered beside Jacob's body, was used in both killings. But the why, the motive, the emotional trigger, that stayed elusive. Complicating matters further was the sensitivity of military employment. The Air Force operates under both federal and state jurisdictions, meaning evidence shared between civilian police and military investigators required legal coordination. Information that might be easily accessible in a civilian case could take weeks to clear under military confidentiality protocols. Meanwhile, the Air Force OSI continued its parallel inquiry, examining Jacob's military records, recent performance reviews, any disciplinary notes, and even workplace correspondence with Jaime Gustitus. They were looking for anything, any sign of tension, obsession, or warning. But according to publicly available reports, no prior complaints or behavioral red flags were found. The investigation also touched the families. Loved ones of the victims were questioned with care and compassion. What had they noticed in Jacob's behavior? Had Jaime said anything unusual in the days before her death? Were there hints of stress, fear, or conflict? If answers existed, they've not been made public. As the days passed, the story spread nationwide. News outlets like Fox 19, People magazine, and WNO-TV covered the case, quoting law enforcement and Air Force officials. Each outlet emphasized the same thing. Authorities do not yet know the motive. The timeline remains incomplete, and the case is still under active investigation. The Air Force urged patience, vowing transparency once facts were verified. Lieutenant General Hurry reassured personnel that the safety and mental well-being of our airmen and guardians remain our highest priority. Still, whispers continued, in base corridors, on social media, and online forums, people trying to make sense of how such tragedy could unfold among people who once shared the same halls, the same mission, the same flag. By late October, investigators were still piecing together digital data and forensic evidence. Each fragment brought them closer to a full timeline, but the emotional weight of the case lingered. Because this was not just a crime scene, it was a community in mourning. 3 promising lives, bound by duty and undone by violence. And somewhere within that silence, investigators knew, lay the truth, buried not in evidence but in motive. But as detectives worked tirelessly to piece the puzzle together, a shocking revelation was about to surface, one that would change the way everyone saw this case. It was a crime that seemed to end with Jacob Prichard's final act. But when investigators began to unravel the details, they realized something chilling. Jacob had left one final message. When officers arrived at the West Milton Municipal Building parking lot, the first thing they noticed wasn't the man slumped inside the car. It was the open trunk. Authorities later confirmed to People.com that the trunk wasn't forced open or damaged. It had been left open intentionally. Inside, they found the body of 33-year-old Jaymee Prichard, Jacob's wife. It was as if Jacob had wanted them to see her, to find her, a silent confession left for the world to discover. That single act changed the entire nature of the case. It wasn't just a double murder and suicide. It was a deliberate sequence of events, precise, grim, and deeply personal. But even with that discovery, one question loomed largest. When, and where, was Jaymee killed? Investigators told People.com that the time and location of her death remain unknown. She wasn't killed at the municipal lot. That much was clear from the lack of shell casings or signs of struggle. But there was no evidence placing her at the apartment in Sugar Creek Township either, the second major scene where First Lieutenant Jaime Gustitus had been shot. That meant there were three separate locations connected by tragedy. First, Gustitus's apartment, where neighbors reported hearing multiple gunshots and the sound of breaking glass. Second, an unknown location, somewhere between Sugar Creek Township and the Prichard home, where Jaime's life was likely taken. And finally, the West Milton Municipal lot, 20 miles away, where Jacob's car came to rest, the trunk open, his own body beside the weapon. The distance between those sites painted a haunting map of movement, a route that spanned 2 counties, multiple police jurisdictions, and hours of unanswered time. According to reports from Fox 19 and The Independent, neighbors in Jaime Gustitus's quiet apartment complex woke in the early morning to the sound of gunfire and what some described as glass shattering. One resident called police after hearing a series of sharp cracks, then silence. When officers arrived, they found Jaime dead inside her apartment, shot multiple times. There was evidence of forced entry suggesting a confrontation. But no one saw Jacob leave. By the time police were on the scene, he was already gone, driving into the darkness, Jaime's body in the trunk, the end of his journey already planned. Investigators would later piece together what they could: traffic camera footage, phone records, timeline estimates. But the exact sequence of killings remains uncertain even now. Some detectives believe Jacob killed Jaime first, an act of rage or despair that spiraled into the murder of Jaime Gustitus. Others suspect the opposite, that Jaime's killing triggered a mental breakdown, leading Jacob to return home and end Jaime's life before taking his own. But there's no hard proof either way. Only fragments. Only silence where the truth should be. And so, the biggest questions of the case remain unanswered. Why Jaime? Why Jaime? What happened between the three of them in those final days? Both women worked with Jacob at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Jaime was a respected first lieutenant, described by colleagues as brilliant, driven, and deeply committed to her work. Jaime, equally accomplished, worked as a civilian employee within the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center. She was known for her warmth, her professionalism, and her deep care for those around her. Jacob himself, a civilian engineer, had an impressive career. Public records show he had served the Air Force for several years, described by coworkers as quiet, intelligent, and dependable. There were no reports of disciplinary action, no open investigations, no warning signs of violence. To those who knew them, they were part of the same professional world. Not strangers, not adversaries, but colleagues. Which makes the why so haunting. What communication, or confrontation, preceded that night? Did something personal cross into professional space? Or was this the collapse of a man living a hidden turmoil no one saw coming? Even after hundreds of pages of reports, interviews, and forensic data, investigators have never released a clear motive. And in that absence, speculation has only grown. Some in the community wondered whether this was premeditated, carefully planned over days. Others believe it was a sudden emotional breakdown, a single night of overwhelming despair and confusion that erupted into violence. What's certain is that the community was shaken. In Sugar Creek Township, residents left flowers and notes outside Jaime's building. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, vigils were held for the victims, 3 members of the same Air Force family, gone within hours. Even now, months later, co-workers still describe an atmosphere of disbelief. because none of it made sense. Not the distances Jacob drove. Not the open trunk. Not the lack of explanation. He had left behind only actions, and a final haunting scene that spoke louder than any note could. And as the investigation continued, the families and the entire Air Force community were left with more pain than answers. In the days that followed, grief, confusion, and anger all collided. Friends tried to make sense of the loss. Officials worked to maintain calm. And behind every statement of sympathy was a single unspoken truth. No one could explain why this happened. When the sun rose over West Milton that October morning, 3 lives were gone, and an entire community was left in disbelief. News of the tragedy spread quickly through the Miami Valley and across Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where all 3 victims were connected. For colleagues who had seen them just days earlier, the reality felt impossible. Offices fell silent, projects paused, and grief counselors were brought in to help airmen and civilian staff process the loss. According to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base officials, support services were immediately offered, from mental health counseling to family assistance, as the Air Force community mourned the sudden deaths of their own. The base commander described the situation as deeply heartbreaking for everyone who serves and works here. Among those grieving most deeply were the families of Jaime and Jacob Prichard, and the family of First Lieutenant Jaime Gustitus, each left to navigate a wave of sorrow and confusion. Friends and coworkers described Jaime as a light, someone who brought optimism and dedication to her work in the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center. She was remembered for her warmth, professionalism, and kindness toward everyone she met. Jaime Gustitus, just 25 years old, had been seen as a rising star in the Air Force Research Laboratory's Human Performance Wing. She had joined with ambition and integrity, her colleagues saying she had only just begun to make an impact. She was dedicated to her role, passionate about science and service, and known for her compassion, both inside and outside her uniform. Jacob Prichard's death, too, left those who knew him in disbelief. Publicly, he had no known criminal record or history of violence. Coworkers described him to People.com and Fox 19 as quiet and intelligent, not the man anyone would have expected to carry out such horrific acts. His actions, they said, were utterly out of character. In the days that followed, tributes began appearing online. Photos, condolences, and heartfelt words from coworkers, friends, and strangers alike. A meal train page was set up to support one of the affected families, as noted by The Independent, providing meals and assistance while they navigated the shock and loss. Across social media, Wright-Patterson personnel expressed grief and disbelief. Many said they had crossed paths with one or more of the 3 at some point on base. One airman wrote, "It feels like we lost part of our own family." The Air Force leadership, including Lieutenant General Linda Hurry, released public statements expressing condolences to the families and reaffirming support for ongoing investigations. The tragedy prompted internal reviews, questions about workplace stress, security awareness, and how signs of distress might be better recognized among personnel in high-pressure environments. Meanwhile, journalists from People, Fox 19, and local Ohio outlets continued to report on the investigation, but many questions remained unanswered. The timeline of Jaime's death, the precise motive, and Jacob's state of mind in his final hours are still unclear. As the weeks turned into months, the story slowly faded from national headlines, but not from the hearts of those at Wright-Patterson. Within the base community, the impact lingers, a quiet reminder of how fragile even the most disciplined lives can be. In the end, 3 lives, filled with promise, intelligence, and dedication, were cut short. Families were shattered, friendships broken, and a once thriving workplace left scarred by loss. And yet, amid the grief, one truth stands out. Behind the headlines, these were real people. Jaime, Jacob. Each with dreams, careers, and people who loved them. Their story remains one of tragedy, unanswered questions, and the haunting reminder that sometimes, even in places of honor and discipline, darkness can quietly take hold. This case is more than a headline. It's a haunting reminder that behind every breaking story are human lives. Lives filled with love, duty, and private pain that few ever saw coming. 3 people connected by work, by service, and by tragedy. And yet, the questions still echo. Who was Jaime Prichard? And when exactly was she killed? What drove Jacob from a decorated Air Force researcher to a man capable of ending 3 lives, including his own? And could any of it have been prevented, if someone had seen the signs sooner? Even now, investigators continue piecing together the fragments of that night. But maybe the deeper truth isn't just about what happened. It's about how easily despair, secrecy, or emotional breakdowns can hide beneath ordinary lives, until it's far too late. So I'll leave you with this. What do you think really happened that night? Share your thoughts, your theories, in the comments below. If this story struck you, share it with others. Because sometimes the more eyes that see, the closer we get to the truth. And if you want more stories that look beyond the crime, into the people, the choices, and the shadows behind it all, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Because these aren't just cases. They're lives. And they deserve to be remembered.